Scene 1 off Storytime uses playfulness and artifice to reach something quietly profound, framing queer intimacy not as spectacle, but as memory, reassurance, and the enduring need to be seen. The opening image of Victoria and Lilly lounging together immediately situates the audience inside a shared history, one shaped by familiarity and trust, as Lilly asks Victoria to tell her a story like she used to in college, a request that is less about entertainment than about continuity, about returning to a moment when connection felt effortless. Victoria's joking suggestions of robots or rogue alpacas establish her instinct to deflect emotional exposure with humor, a defense many women recognize, while Lily's insistence on a love story gently but firmly redirects the moment toward vulnerability. When Victoria chooses to tell a story about two women in love, the film makes an intentional pivot, signaling that queerness here is not subtext but subject, not coded but named. A transition into the black and white, laugh-track-laden world evokes classic sitcom imagery, a deliberate reference to eras of television where domestic happiness was rigidly scripted and overwhelmingly heterosexual, and placing Maya and Alex inside this aesthetic immediately highlights the tension between appearance and reality. Maya, the baking housewife distressed over her pie, embodies the pressure to perform perfection, to meet an ideal that promises fulfillment but rarely delivers it, while Alex's warm entrance and instinctive tenderness initially seem to complete the picture. The laugh track and monochrome palette underscore how constrained this version of happiness is, even as it looks familiar and socially approved, and queer viewers in particular may recognize the exhaustion of trying to fit their lives into narratives never designed to hold them. When Alex kisses Maya and the world suddenly bursts into color, the shift feels revelatory rather than gimmicky, visually expressing how authenticity restores vibrancy, how desire acknowledged openly brings depth back into experience. Maya's confession that she is tired of trying to be perfect and playing housewife articulates a longing that resonates beyond sexuality, speaking to women who have been praised for compliance but starved of passion, who have mistaken responsibility for fulfillment. Her desire is not for novelty, but for the intensity they once shared, for the emotional aliveness that existed before routines calcified into roles. Alex's pause before responding is crucial, suggesting reflection rather than reflex, and when she kisses Maya again, allowing the color to flood back fully, the gesture reads as recommitment rather than seduction, an agreement to meet her partner where she truly is. Framed within Victoria's storytelling, this inner narrative also mirrors the relationship between Victoria and Lilly, hinting that stories are how they process their own desires and fears, how they negotiate closeness without having to state everything outright. For lesbian audiences, the scene resonates as a reclaiming of domestic imagery that has historically excluded or sanitized queer love, transforming the sitcom housewife trope into a space where two women can articulate dissatisfaction and choose each other anew. The film challenges society's discomfort with seeing women express love for each other, not by confronting it head-on, but by subverting familiar forms, using the laugh track and black and white visuals to show how artificial those constraints are, and how quickly they dissolve when honesty enters the frame. That discomfort persists precisely because women's love for women destabilizes long-held narratives about fulfillment, reproduction, and gendered labor, and because it resists being neatly categorized as either rebellion or novelty. By centering emotional intimacy rather than physical explicitness, the scene insists that passion is not inherently loud or scandalous, but can be quiet, domestic, and deeply felt. Symbolically, Maya represents the woman who has done everything right and still feels empty, while Alex embodies the possibility of listening and evolving rather than dismissing that dissatisfaction as ingratitude. Victoria, as storyteller, becomes a bridge between fantasy and reality, using narrative as a safe container for truth, while Lily's insistence on a love story reflects the courage to ask for what one needs, even when it risks exposing longing. Their interaction mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to minimize desire, to couch it in humor or nostalgia, and the film gently pushes back, suggesting that telling the story itself is an act of resistance. The final affirmation that Storytime makes for the best time lands not as a joke but as a thesis, proposing that stories allow women to rehearse authenticity, to imagine lives where passion and stability are not opposites. This scene is not about fantasy or taboo, but about recognition, about seeing oneself reflected in a narrative that honors complexity and warmth. By weaving queerness into both the framing and the framed story, Storytime celebrates the power of love stories told by and for women, affirming that becoming visible can begin in the simple act of asking for a story and daring to tell one honestly. Scene 2 of Storytime gently pulls the audience out of the stylized fantasy and back into the present, revealing that the black and white sitcom world was never an escape but a mirror. a shared language Victoria and Lilly use to speak about their own fears without naming them too directly. Having collaborated to give the fictional couple a loving, committed ending, the two women now sit with the quiet aftermath of storytelling, the space where imagination gives way to emotional truth. Their conversation about love is unhurried and intimate, rooted not in declarations but in uncertainty, and it is Lily's vulnerability that anchors the scene. Her fear that Victoria will eventually grow bored and leave echoes Maya's exhaustion in the story, suggesting that fiction has allowed Lily to safely articulate an anxiety she has carried for some time, the belief that stability is fragile, that being loved does not guarantee being chosen tomorrow. This fear resonates deeply with lesbian audiences, many of whom have absorbed cultural narratives that frame queer relationships as temporary, experimental, or lacking the endurance afforded to heterosexual love. Lily's worry is not dramatic but quietly persistent, the kind of doubt that lives beneath affection and surfaces only when one feels safe enough to say it aloud. Victoria's response is instinctive rather than rehearsed, and when she kisses Lily to reassure her, the gesture is tender and sincere, an attempt to communicate through presence what words might complicate. Yet Lily's hesitation afterward, her concern that the kiss happened only because it was expected, reveals how deeply women are trained to question their own desirability and to mistrust affection, especially in relationships that exist outside dominant scripts. This moment captures a truth many women recognize: reassurance can feel hollow when one fears it is offered out of obligation rather than desire. Victoria's insistence that she wanted to kiss Lily is not defensive but grounding, a reclaiming of agency that reframes intimacy as choice rather than performance. Their second kiss, deeper and more assured, becomes an act of mutual consent and clarity, a quiet declaration that desire does not need justification beyond itself. The scene challenges society's discomfort with seeing women express love for each other by refusing to sensationalize the moment, instead centering emotional negotiation, consent, and reassurance, elements often erased or trivialized in portrayals of queer intimacy. This discomfort persists because women loving women destabilizes long-standing assumptions about who gets to want, who gets to stay, and whose relationships are granted seriousness. By allowing Lily's fear to exist without ridicule and Victoria's response to be patient rather than dismissive, the film validates the emotional labor that often underpins queer relationships, labor made heavier by external narratives that cast doubt on their longevity. Symbolically, Lily represents the part of many women shaped by scarcity, the voice that asks whether love can last without novelty, while Victoria embodies reassurance rooted in self-awareness, someone who understands that choosing to stay is an ongoing act rather than a promise made once. Their interaction mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to minimize attachment, to pretend they are casual or unaffected in order to protect themselves from disappointment. And the scene gently resists this impulse by honoring openness as strength. The kiss does not resolve all uncertainty, nor is it meant to. Instead, it affirms that love can coexist with fear, that reassurance does not erase doubt but can soften its edges. For women broadly, the scene speaks to the universal longing to be wanted freely, not out of habit or expectation, and to the courage required to ask for that reassurance even when doing so risks rejection. By returning from fantasy to reality, Storytime underscores that stories are not escapism but rehearsal, a way to practice honesty and imagine outcomes that feel possible. Victoria and Lily's choice to confront their feelings directly, rather than hiding behind metaphor, becomes the film's quiet thesis, that becoming visible to one another is the most radical act of love. This is not about taboo or spectacle, but about two women choosing to stay present, to listen, and to affirm desire as intentional rather than assumed. In doing so, the scene offers viewers a deeply recognizable portrait of intimacy that values emotional clarity over certainty, reminding us that love is sustained not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to meet it together.